When I walked into my son's newly purchased colonial home for the housewarming dinner, his wife Jessica looked me up and down and shouted, "You're too old for this house." The words crashed into me like a physical blow, forcing the air from my lungs in a painful rush. Too old for this house. The gleaming hardwood floors seemed to tilt beneath my sensible navy blue. Clark's pumps as everyone in the crowded living room fell silent. 23 guests, including my brother Thomas and his wife Carol, my two closest friends, Linda and Margaret, and various neighbors I'd never met. All froze with their wine glasses suspended midair. Too old for this house. The phrase echoed in the sudden silence, bouncing off the trendy gray walls with white trim and modern furniture that my son Michael and his wife had selected. Furniture I had helped them pick out at Pottery Barn, West Elm, and Crate and Barrel, spending 14 hours across 3 separate shopping trips offering advice they had seemed to appreciate at the time. 14 hours of my life given freely, lovingly, now rendered worthless with 5 cruel words. Jessica's perfectly glossed lips, painted in that trendy mauve color that costs $38 at Sephora, curled into what might have been mistaken for a smile if you hadn't heard what preceded it. At 34 she stood there in her designer jeans from Nordstrom that cost $245 and cream cashmere sweater from Anthropologie. Hair falling in waves around a face carefully maintained with monthly chemical peels at $175 each and quarterly Botox injections that cost $450 per session. I knew the exact figures because she had mentioned them repeatedly, always with a sidelong glance at my own face with its 62 years of laughter lines, sun exposure from gardening, and the remnants of teenage acne scars I'd never had the money to treat professionally. My son Michael, standing beside her with a platter of bruschetta appetizers that I had taught him how to make when he was 14 and curious about cooking, looked down at his polished Colehorn loafers, his cheeks flushing deep red. He said nothing at all as his wife publicly humiliated his mother. I felt the heat of humiliation crawl up my neck like a physical entity, burning beneath my skin as I clutched my housewarming gift, tighter a hand-embroidered set of kitchen towels with an intricate pattern of herbs and cooking utensils that I'd spent 78 hours creating over the past 6 weeks, pricking my fingers countless times, working under my special craft lamp until my eyes strained. The metallic taste of shame filled my mouth, sharp and acrid like old pennies. As Jessica's words hung in the air between us, my vision blurred slightly at the edges, the faces of the other guests becoming indistinct as I felt a cold sweat break out across my back, dampening my new blue silk blouse that I'd paid $127.50 for at Macy's specifically for this occasion, using the 15% off coupon I'd saved for something special. What I meant, Jessica continued, her voice honey-sweet now, performing for her audience, is that this house is so modern and fresh. We wanted a younger vibe for our first real home together. You understand, don't you, Elaine? She stepped forward, taking the gift from my suddenly stiff fingers, her French manicured nails briefly brushing against my unpolished ones. How quaint, she murmured, barely glancing at the intricate embroidery before passing it to Michael, who set it aside on the entryway console table without looking at it either, as if it were a piece of junk mail, rather than hours of my labor and love. I've raised a son who won't defend his own mother, I thought with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins. 29 years of bedtime stories, bandaged knees, college tuition payments that I'd worked 2 jobs to afford, and unconditional love, and he stood silent while his wife of 3 years publicly humiliated me. The pressure behind my eyes threatened tears, but I refused to give Jessica the satisfaction. I managed a tight smile as conversation gradually resumed around us, the moment passing for everyone except me. But inside, something fundamental had cracked open, revealing a truth I'd been avoiding for the past 3 years. Ever since Michael had brought Jessica home and she'd examined me like I was an inconvenient piece of furniture that clashed with her design scheme for the perfect life. "Mom, can you help in the kitchen?" Michael finally spoke, gesturing toward the gleaming new space visible through an archway, with its white quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances that I knew had cost them nearly $15,000 to upgrade. His voice held a note of pleading, perhaps a belated attempt to extract me from the scene of my humiliation. I nodded mechanically and followed him, my legs moving automatically while my mind replayed Jessica's words on an endless loop. Too old for this house. Too old, as if my age was a stain, a defect that might contaminate their perfect new home. In the kitchen, the smell of the roasting chicken with lemon and herbs I had suggested they prepare filled the air, mingling with the scent of the fresh paint and new cabinets. Michael turned to me, keeping his voice low, his eyes darting nervously toward the living room. "Mom, you know how Jessica gets about appearances. She didn't mean anything by it." His eyes darted toward the living room, checking if his wife might overhear his mild defense of me. "She's just stressed about making a good impression with the new neighbors. You know how important their opinion is to her. By humiliating your mother." The words slipped out before I could stop them, my voice barely above a whisper but sharp with pain. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, my hands still trembling slightly. Michael sighed, running his hand through his dark hair that matched mine before I'd gone gray at 47 after years of single parenting stress. "You're being too sensitive." That's not what she meant. The dismissal in his tone was like a second slap. "Can you just help with the salad? We're running behind, and Jessica wants everything to be perfect tonight." And just like that, I was assigned a task in my son's kitchen while the woman who had just declared me too old for their precious house held court in the living room. I could hear her laughter, practiced and performative, rising above the general conversation as she charmed their guests. I mechanically washed romaine lettuce and sliced English cucumbers, cherry tomatoes, and red bell peppers, the knife rhythmically hitting the cutting board, while my mind calculated all I had given to my son. The $42,700 for his college education, scraped together from my teacher's salary, and weekend work at a local bookstore. The 3,744 meals I had cooked for him growing up, each prepared with care, despite my exhaustion after long days of teaching 10th grade English. The 17 times I had stayed up all night when he was sick with ear infections, fevers, and once, a terrifying case of pneumonia that had required a 3-day hospital stay when he was 7. The $22,000 down payment I had contributed to this very house. Money from my retirement fund that I had given freely, happily even, wanting to help my only child start his married life securely, after Jessica had complained repeatedly about their tiny 2-bedroom apartment that was actually quite spacious. I arranged the salad in the expensive ceramic bowl that I recognized from their wedding registry, a Pottery Barn piece that cost $89 that Jessica had registered for at their wedding. A wedding that had cost me $31,450, nearly a third of my retirement savings. My fingers trembled slightly as I drizzled the balsamic vinaigrette, creating a perfect spiral pattern the way I always did. The way I had taught Michael to do when he was 12 and interested in cooking alongside me. Back when I wasn't too old to be valuable. Back when being his mother was enough to make me worthy of respect. That evening progressed in a blur of forced smiles and mechanical small talk. I watched as Jessica charmed the neighbors. A couple in their early 30s named Brandon and Alyssa who had moved in across the street. "We're so excited to have young neighbors," Jessica gushed, her hand resting possessively on Michael's arm. "We wanted our home to be the gathering place for young families in the neighborhood." Her eyes flickered to me for a fraction of a second. "It's so important to surround yourself with energy and fresh perspectives, don't you think?" Brandon nodded enthusiastically. "Totally. Our last neighborhood was full of older people. No offense," he added with a quick glance at me, "but it was kind of a downer. No one to hang out with, you know." "Exactly," Jessica agreed, as if I wasn't standing right there, as if I hadn't hosted countless dinner parties and neighborhood gatherings in my own home over the decades. "That's why we wanted everything here to feel young and vibrant." I observed how my son moved in her orbit, his expressions and reactions calibrated to her approval. I saw with new clarity how he had gradually adopted her dismissive tone when speaking about things I cared about or suggestions I offered. When had this happened? When had my confident, kind son become this anxious to please shadow of himself? And when had I become so desperate for his attention that I'd accepted this gradual erosion of respect? By the time dessert was served, a store-bought cheesecake from Whole Foods that cost $42.99 rather than my homemade apple pie that had always been Michael's favorite. I had counted 17 subtle and not-so-subtle references to age, youth, or being current. Jessica had managed to work into conversation that she would just die if she found a gray hair, that her mother, 3 years younger than me at 59, was practically ancient, and that she was so glad they'd moved to this neighborhood with young, vibrant energy rather than the retirement community vibe of where I lived. My 3-bedroom home in a mixed-age suburb suddenly reframed as God's waiting room. At 9:17 p.m., I made my excuses and prepared to leave, gathering my purse and the light jacket I'd brought against the early spring chill. Michael walked me to the door, his goodbye hug perfunctory and distracted. "Thanks for coming, Mom, and for helping with dinner." No acknowledgement of Jessica's behavior. No real warmth, just social obligation fulfilled. "Michael," I said quietly as I stood on the porch, the cool evening air raising goosebumps on my arms. The scent of their newly planted boxwood shrubs sharp in my nostrils. "Do you remember what you said to me on your wedding day?" I searched his face for any trace of the son who had held my hands 3 years ago, and promised that no matter what happened in his life, I would always be his best friend, his cornerstone. A flicker of discomfort crossed his features. "Mom, I really need to get back to our guests." He glanced over his shoulder, toward the laughter emanating from inside. Jessica's laugh, musical and deliberate, rose above the others. "Of course," I said, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years, the weight of them pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. "Enjoy your evening." I turned and walked to my car, my sensible low heels clicking against the concrete of the driveway I had helped pay for with money I'd been saving for a trip to England I'd dreamed of taking since college, but had repeatedly postponed to help Michael instead. I drove home in silence, no radio, no phone call to my friend Linda, as I would normally make after such an event. Just the sound of my own breathing, and the occasional squeak of my windshield wipers clearing the light drizzle that had begun to fall. "Too old for this house." The words kept time with the rhythmic swish of the wipers. Too old, swish. Too old, swish. When I arrived home, I didn't immediately go inside. Instead, I sat in my car in the darkness of my garage and did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in public. I cried. Not delicate tears, but wrenching sobs that tore from somewhere deep and primal within me. I cried for the son who once thought I hung the moon and stars. I cried for the gradual erosion of my place in his life. I cried for the realization that I had become an inconvenience, an embarrassment, someone to be tolerated rather than cherished. Most of all, I cried because I had seen it happening for 3 years and had said nothing, had accepted each small slight and dismissal in the name of not rocking the boat, not being that kind of mother-in-law that night. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the yellow glow of the streetlight outside my window casting shadows across my walls, the phrase kept returning. Too old for this house. Was I too old for everything now? Too old to be respected? Too old to be included? Too old to matter? Sleep eluded me as I cataloged every interaction with Jessica and Michael over the past 3 years, seeing the pattern with devastating clarity. The invitations that stopped coming to dinners with their friends, to movies they were seeing, to events they attended. The phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent, from daily check-ins to weekly obligatory conversations that Michael clearly rushed through. The way my suggestions were increasingly dismissed with patronizing patience about recipes, about home decor, about the children's books I recommended for my granddaughter Lily. The subtle comments about my clothes being mature, my hair being traditional, my opinions being from another era. The gradual erasure of my presence in my son's life, as if I were fading like an old photograph left too long in the sun. By the time dawn broke, something had shifted inside me. The tears had dried, leaving behind a strange, cold clarity. I rose and made coffee, its bitter aroma filling my quiet kitchen as I opened my laptop and began to research. What I found both validated my experience and filled me with a new kind of anger. Age discrimination wasn't just something I was experiencing in isolation. It was pervasive, documented, studied. There were names for what was happening to me. Terms like ageism, gendered ageism, invisibility syndrome. I wasn't imagining the subtle and not so subtle ways society had begun to push me aside once I'd crossed some invisible threshold from valued to obsolete. I read studies about how women over 50 are portrayed in media when they appear at all, about workplace discrimination against older women, about the double standard of aging for men versus women. I found forums and support groups for women sharing experiences eerily similar to my daughters-in-law, who treated them as irrelevant, children who dismissed their input, grandchildren kept at arm's length unless babysitting was needed. The more I read, the more my hurt crystallized into something harder and more focused. This wasn't just about Jessica's cruelty or Michael's betrayal. It was about a culture that taught them that treating me this way was acceptable. 3 days after the housewarming incident, I still hadn't heard from Michael. No call to check if I'd gotten home safely on the rainy night. No text to thank me for the gift or for helping with dinner. Nothing. In the past, I would have reached out first, making some excuse to connect, pathetically grateful for whatever crumbs of attention he might toss my way. Not this time. Instead, I called my brother Thomas. Jessica said what? Thomas's voice crackled with indignation over the phone line. At 66, my older brother had always been protective of me, especially since my divorce from Michael's father 14 years ago, after he left me for a coworker 15 years my junior. You heard me, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice as I sat at my kitchen table, clutching my coffee mug with both hands for warmth, in front of everyone, and Michael said nothing. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Finally, Thomas sighed heavily, the sound of his disappointment carrying clearly across the phone line. Elaine, I've been wanting to say something for a while now. The way they treat you, it isn't right. Carol and I have noticed it too. Something inside me both crumbled and strengthened at his words. So I'm not overreacting, not being too sensitive. The questions came out small, vulnerable. The insecurity that Jessica and Michael had planted taking root. Hell no. My brother's response was immediate and forceful. If anything, you've been underreacting for years. Remember Thanksgiving when Jessica made that comment about your outfit making you look like someone's grandmother? And laughed like it was the funniest joke. I am someone's grandmother, I said automatically, thinking of Michael's 2-year-old daughter Lily, who I was allowed to see only on carefully orchestrated visits that Jessica controlled like a military operation. Always scheduled around her convenient times, often canceled at the last minute with flimsy excuses. That's not the point, and you know it, Thomas replied, the sound of his recliner creaking as he shifted position carrying through the phone. The point is the contempt behind it. The dismissal. You deserve better, sis. And it's time you demanded it. After speaking with Thomas, I called Linda, my closest friend since our college days 41 years ago when we'd bonded over a shared love of Jane Austen and a mutual hatred of our required economics class. Then I called Margaret, who I'd met in my gardening club 12 years back, and who had become a steady presence in my life through her no-nonsense wisdom and wicked sense of humor. Their reactions mirrored my brosa mixture of outrage on my behalf and gentle suggestions that this treatment from Michael and Jessica wasn't new, just more blatant now. She felt comfortable enough to say it out loud because she's been saying it in smaller ways for years, Margaret observed, her Georgia accent still strong despite 30 years in Minnesota. And honey, you've been letting her. The truth of her words stung, but I couldn't deny them. I had been so afraid of losing my relationship with my son that I'd accepted increasingly disrespectful treatment. Making excuses, minimizing the hurt, blaming myself. Too eager to be the understanding mother, the undemanding mother-in-law, the mother who never makes waves, never causes trouble, never insists on basic dignity, all to maintain access to a relationship that had become increasingly one-sided and painful. The following Sunday, exactly 1 week after the housewarming, my phone finally chimed with a text from Michael, bringing Lily over at 2. Jessica has a spa day. Can stay about an hour. No greeting, no question about whether I was available, just an announcement of when he would briefly allow me to see my granddaughter while his wife was otherwise occupied. as if my time had no value, as if I should be pathetically grateful for whatever moments they deigned to share. In the past, I would have quickly replied with eager confirmation, perhaps offering to bake Lily's favorite cookies or prepare a special activity. I would have spent the morning cleaning my already tidy house and changing my outfit 3 times, anxious to win approval and avoid criticism. Not today. Today, I waited 37 minutes before responding, deliberately giving myself time to consider what I really wanted instead of automatically accommodating them. Sorry, I have plans this afternoon. Next time, please check if I'm available before assuming I can rearrange my schedule. I'd love to see Lily on Tuesday after 3 p.m. if that works for you. I pressed send before I could second-guess myself, my heart pounding with anxiety at this small act of self-assertion. Then I put my phone on silent and went to take a long, hot bath, adding the lavender bath salts that Linda had given me for Christmas that I'd been saving for a special occasion. I didn't actually have plans, but for the first time in years, I was prioritizing my own dignity over my desperation to see my son and granddaughter. When I finally checked my phone 2 hours later, there were 3 missed calls from Michael and a text that simply read, "Are you serious right now? Jessica specifically arranged this so you could see Lily. Tuesday doesn't work for us." The entitlement in his message made something harden further inside me. I had been available at their convenience for years, rearranging my schedule, canceling my own plans, when they suddenly decided to grace me with their presence, rushing to accommodate their last-minute visits. "No more," I typed back. "I'm quite serious. I have commitments today that I'm not willing to break on such short notice. I'm free Tuesday after 3, or Thursday morning before 11. Let me know if either works for you." Then, I put my phone away again and went to meet Linda for the movie we'd decided to see when I called her after Michael's text. A small act of rebellion choosing my friend over the chance to see my granddaughter under their controlling terms, but it felt significant. A tiny step toward reclaiming my self-respect. That evening, my doorbell rang at 7:43 p.m. When I opened it, Michael stood there alone, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance, his jacket slightly rumpled as if he'd thrown it on in haste. "Mom, what's going on with you?" he demanded, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, bringing with him the faint scent of the cologne Jessica had bought him last Christmas, a designer brand that cost $125 per bottle. "Since when do you have plans that are more important than seeing your granddaughter?" I closed the door quietly, taking a moment to gather myself before turning to face my son. The son who had stood silent while his wife declared me too old for their house. The son who had gradually allowed me to be pushed to the margins of his life. "I've always had a life, Michael," I said calmly, though I could feel my heart racing. "I've just been willing to put it aside whenever you and Jessica decided I was allowed to be part of yours. That's changing now." He stared at me as if I'd started speaking in tongues, his dark eyebrows drawing together in confusion. "What are you talking about? We include you in everything important. Do you?" I moved past him into my living room, gesturing for him to sit on the beige sofa I'd purchased 3 years ago from Ashley Furniture during their Memorial Day sale. He remained standing, his posture defensive, hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked about my life instead of just telling me when I'm permitted to see Lily? When was the last time you defended me when Jessica made one of her little comments about my age or appearance?" His face flushed, but his expression hardened. "You're being dramatic. Jessica respects you. She's just direct sometimes. She said I was too old for your house," I stated flatly, feeling the sharp edge of the memory cut through me again, "in front of everyone. And you said nothing." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache despite my anger. "She didn't mean it like that. You're twisting her words. How exactly should I have interpreted you're too old for this house, Michael?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice remained when inside I felt like screaming. "Please, explain the nuance I'm missing." He shifted uncomfortably, looking around my living room as if searching for an escape route. "She just meant, the aesthetic we're going for is young and contemporary. It wasn't personal. It felt very personal when she shouted it in front of 23 people. I sat down on my sofa, suddenly tired, the weight of years of small humiliations pressing down on me. And it feels personal every time she makes a comment about my clothes being outdated, or my opinions being irrelevant, or how she'd just die if she looked like women my age. You're being too sensitive, Michael insisted, the dismissal so automatic it was clear this was his default response to any criticism of his wife. Jessica is under a lot of pressure. Her job, the new house, being a mom. You could try to be more understanding. I looked at my son, really looked at him and saw the man he had become. A man who would justify disrespect toward his mother to keep peace with his wife. A man who had decided I was the one who should compromise, always. The realization felt like ice water in my veins, shocking but clarifying. I've been understanding for 3 years, Michael. I've smiled through every dismissive comment, every last-minute cancellation, every time Jessica has made it clear I'm barely tolerated. I've told myself it was worth it to maintain a relationship with you and Lily. I'm not sure that's true anymore. His expression shifted from defensive to alarmed, eyes widening slightly. What does that mean? It means I deserve better, I said simply, feeling a strange calm settle over me as I voiced the truth I'd been denying for too long. From both of you. And until I get it, I won't be available at your convenience. When you're ready to treat me with basic respect and courtesy, checking if I'm available before, announcing when you'll drop by, not allowing your wife to publicly humiliate me, acknowledging that I have value beyond being your on-call babysitter, then we can rebuild our relationship. Until then, I'll be living my life on my terms. Michael stared at me as if I'd grown a second head, his mouth actually dropping open slightly. Are you giving me an ultimatum about seeing your own granddaughter? No, I replied carefully, measuring my words. I'm setting boundaries about how I allow myself to be treated. There's a difference. He didn't stay much longer after that. His parting words, Jessica was right about you being difficult, hung in the air long after he slammed the door behind him, the sound reverberating through my quiet house. I sat in my living room, my heart pounding painfully in my chest, the ticking of the grandfather clock that had belonged to my parents sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. Had I just made a terrible mistake? Had I just blown up my relationship with my only child over one insensitive comment? But it wasn't just one comment. It was 3 years of death by 1,000 cuts. 3 years of being gradually erased from my son's life, except when convenient for them. 3 years of swallowing my hurt to maintain access to my granddaughter. The question wasn't whether I could afford to set this boundary. It was whether I could afford not to. That night, I barely slept, alternating between conviction that I'd done the right thing and panic that I'd destroyed my relationship with my son forever. I tossed and turned, the sheets tangling around my legs, my mind replaying our conversation and imagining increasingly catastrophic outcomes. By morning, the panic had receded somewhat, replaced by a strange, calm resolve. I wasn't going to back down. For perhaps the first time since Michael had introduced me to Jessica, I was prioritizing my own emotional well-being over my desperate fear of losing him. 2 days passed with no word from Michael. I kept busy, having lunch with Linda at our favorite local cafe, where we shared a spinach salad and split a slice of carrot cake, attending my book club where we discussed The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo with perhaps more personal investment than usual, and starting a mosaic project I'd been putting off for months, a garden stepping stone featuring a sunflower design. On the 3rd day, I received a text from an unknown number. This is Jessica. Michael is very upset about your conversation. I think we need to clear the air. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? My first instinct was to immediately agree, to grasp at this potential olive branch. Instead, I took a deep breath and considered my response carefully, stepping away from my phone for 10 minutes to think about what I really wanted from this interaction. I agree we should talk, I wrote back. I'm available Friday at 10 a.m. at Riverside Cafe. Choosing a public place felt important. Somewhere Jessica couldn't make a scene without consequences. Fine, came the terse reply. See you then. That night, I called Linda. She wants to meet for coffee. I explained after filling her in on the developments, curled up in my favorite armchair with a cup of chamomile tea. The spring evening just cool enough to warrant the soft throw blanket across my legs. Be careful, Linda warned, her voice heavy with concern. From everything you've told me about Jessica, this isn't going to be her apologizing. She's going to try to put you back in your place. I know, I admitted, watching the steam rise from my teacup. But I need to at least try to repair things. For Lily's sake, if nothing else. Just remember what we talked about. Linda said firmly. You deserve respect. Don't let her make you doubt that. Friday morning arrived cool and clear. I dressed carefully in slim black pants from Talbot's that cost $89. A deep blue cashmere sweater I'd treated myself to last birthday for $175 on sale from $225. And simple pearl earrings my parents had given me for my college graduation 40 years ago. Professional, elegant, and yes, appropriate for my age because there was nothing wrong with being 62. I applied my makeup with extra Cara Light foundation to even my skin tone. A touch of blush for color, mascara, and a neutral lipstick. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make me feel polished and confident. I arrived at the cafe 7 minutes early, selecting a table near the back where we could talk privately, but still in public view. Jessica arrived 12 minutes late, breezing in wearing designer jeans that hugged her slim figure, and a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my entire outfit. Her honey blonde hair was freshly highlighted, falling in perfectly casual waves that I knew required at least 45 minutes of styling to achieve. She carried a sleek leather planner, and positioned it carefully on the table between us. A prop to signal her busy, important life. Elaine, she greeted me with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you for meeting me. Michael is very hurt by your behavior. My behavior. I kept my voice level, though I noted how she immediately positioned me as the problem. Not her public humiliation of me, or Michael's failure to defend his mother. Jessica sighed dramatically, her French manicured nails drumming briefly on the table's surface. This, tantrum you're throwing. Refusing to see Lily. Making accusations about how we treat you. Michael has been beside himself. He can't understand why you're suddenly being so difficult. I'm not refusing to see Lily. I corrected her, focusing on keeping my breathing even. I declined one visit that was announced, not requested, with no consideration for my schedule. And as for being difficult, I paused, meeting her gaze directly. Is that how you characterize someone asking to be treated with basic respect? Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly, a flash of something's surprise, annoyance, crossing her features before she smoothed them back into pleasant neutrality. Respect. We've done nothing but respect you. We include you in family events. We bring Lily to see you. You told me I was too old for your house. I interrupted quietly. In front of everyone at your housewarming party. Jessica waved a manicured hand dismissively, the diamond in her wedding ring catching the light. You completely misunderstood. I was talking about the aesthetic we're going for. It wasn't personal. It felt personal when you shouted it as soon as I walked in. You're being overly sensitive, she said, the familiar dismissal making my jaw tighten. If you'd bothered to listen to what I was actually saying, I heard exactly what you said, Jessica. I kept my voice calm but firm. Just like I've heard all the little comments over the past 3 years. About my clothes, my appearance, my opinions being outdated. The constant references to age as if it's something shameful. She had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable, but recovered quickly, adjusting the sleeve of her blouse. I've never meant to offend you. If you've taken things the wrong way, I'm sorry you feel hurt. The classic non-apology, shifting the blame to my perception rather than her behavior. Let me be clear, I said, leaning forward slightly. I'm not asking for apologies. I'm asking for change. I want to be treated with the same respect you'd show to any other person in your life. I want my son to stand up for me when I'm disrespected. I want to be included in my granddaughter's life, without constant reminders that I'm barely tolerated. Jessica's expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Michael and I are Lily's parents. We decide who sees her and when. If you want to be part of her life, you need to understand that we set the terms. And there it was, the explicit threat that had been implicit all along. Fall in line or lose access to your granddaughter. I felt a momentary flash of fear, then a surprising wave of resolve that straightened my spine and steadied my voice. I understand that completely, I replied evenly. And you need to understand that I'm a person with dignity and worth, not just a convenient babysitter or someone to be mocked for your amusement. If those terms don't include basic respect, then they don't work for me. Jessica's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to stand my ground. For a moment, I glimpsed something like calculation behind her polished exterior. So you're choosing your pride over your relationship with your granddaughter. That seems selfish, especially at your age. How many years do you even have left to enjoy with her? The casual cruelty of her question stole my breath for a moment. The coffee shop around us continued its morning bustle, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversations, the clink of spoons against ceramic butt. It all seemed distant, muffled by the rushing sound in my ears. That's exactly the kind of comment I'm talking about, Jessica, I said when I could trust my voice again, using my age as a weapon, as if I should be grateful for whatever scraps of time you decide to allow me because I'm closer to death than you are. That stops now. We stared at each other across the table, the background noise of the cafe seeming to fade away. Finally, Jessica gathered her planner and stood up, the legs of her chair scraping against the tile floor. I think we're done here. I'll tell Michael you're not willing to be reasonable. He'll be devastated, but that's your choice. As she turned to leave, I spoke again. One more thing, Jessica. She paused, looking back at me with impatience. The $22,000 I contributed to your house down payment. I'd like it back, please. Her expression shifted from dismissive to alarmed, her perfectly controlled facade cracking for the first time. What? That was a gift. It was a contribution to my son's home, a home I'm apparently too old for. I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. Since I'm not welcome there, I'd like my investment returned. I'll be sending an official request by certified mail. Jessica's face flushed with anger, two bright spots of color appearing high on her cheekbones. You can't be serious. That money is long gone, spent on the house. Then you'll need to figure out how to come up with it, I said. Consider it the cost of disrespect. She left without another word, the cafe door swinging shut behind her with more force than necessary. I remained seated, my hands trembling slightly as I sipped my now lukewarm coffee. Had I just made things exponentially worse? Probably. Did I regret standing my ground? Surprisingly, no. The coffee tasted bitter on my tongue, but there was something else there too, a hint of sweetness, like the first taste of something long denied. When I returned home, I called Thomas and filled him in on the confrontation. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of fresh tea, watching the birds at the feeder in my backyard through the window. Are you really going to ask for that money back? He asked after whistling low at my account of the conversation. I don't know, I admitted, tracing the rim of my mug with my finger. Part of me wants to, just to make the point. But another part of me knows it would completely sever things with Michael. Maybe, Thomas agreed. Or maybe it would finally wake him up to how his wife has been treating you. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose it all to gain anything. That evening, my phone rang at 8:22 p.m. Michael's name flashed on the screen. The photo I'd assigned to his contact, him holding baby Lily for the first time, making my heart clench with conflicting emotions. I took a deep breath before answering. Hello, Mom? His voice was tight with anger. The word clipped in harsh. What the hell was that with Jessica today? Demanding money back. Accusing her of disrespecting you. She came home in tears. Something inside me both hardened and clarified at his words. Not once in 3 years had he expressed concern when I came home in tears after one of Jessica's cutting remarks. Not once had he called, outraged on my behalf, when I'd been hurt or dismissed. I stated my boundaries. I replied evenly. And yes, I asked for the down payment money back. If I'm too old for your house, I shouldn't be financing it. That's ridiculous. It was a gift, he snapped, his voice rising. Was it? Check your text messages from February 12th last year, I suggested, keeping my voice calm through sheer force of will. You specifically asked for help with the down payment, not a gift. I have the bank transfer receipt as well, which lists it as a house contribution, not a gift. Silence stretched between us for several seconds, the faint sound of a television in the background on his end, the only indication that the call hadn't dropped. Are you really going to do this? Michael finally asked, his voice quieter now. Are you really going to let money come between us? This isn't about money, Michael. It's about respect. It's about you standing by while your wife repeatedly diminishes and dismisses me. It's about being treated like I have value beyond what's convenient for you and Jessica. She respects you, he insisted, though with less conviction than before. No, she doesn't, and neither do you, not anymore. The truth hurt to say out loud, but it needed to be said. The silence that followed told me the words had hit their mark. Another long pause. So what now? You're just going to, ... What? Cut us off? Sue us for the money? I'm going to insist on being treated with basic dignity, I replied. If that's too much to ask, then yes, we have a problem. As for the money, I'm still deciding. But I want you to really think about something, Michael. If our positions were reversed, if someone treated you the way Jessica treats me, would you accept it? Would you make excuses for them? Or would you expect me to stand up for you? He didn't have an answer for that. After a few more tense exchanges, the call ended with nothing resolved. I sat in my darkened living room afterward, emotionally exhausted but strangely calm. For too long, I had silenced myself to keep the peace, had allowed Jessica's treatment of me to become normalized. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be going back to that. The following week passed in tense silence. No calls from Michael, no texts about Lily. I missed my granddaughter fiercely, her chubby-cheeked smile and the way she called me Gamma haunting my dreams, but held firm to my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about the example I wanted to set for Lily as she grew. Would I want her to see her grandmother accepting disrespect and dismissal as the price of inclusion? Or would I want her to see a woman who knew her own worth and demanded to be treated accordingly? On the 8th day after my confrontation with Jessica, I received an unexpected call from Carol, my brother Thomas's wife. Elaine, you won't believe what I just heard through Diane at church. Diane was a longtime friend of Carol's, whose daughter happened to be in the same mother's group as Jessica. Apparently, Jessica has been telling everyone that you're becoming mentally unstable due to your age, and that she and Michael may need to consider alternative arrangements for you soon. The words hit me like a physical blow, my stomach dropping as if I'd missed a step on a staircase. Alternative arrangements. What does that even mean? From the context, Diane thought she was implying some kind of assisted living or memory care. Carol said gently, her voice cautious. She's painting you as cognitively declining, Elaine, saying you've become paranoid and demanding. That you're threatening them financially because you're confused about gifts versus loans. A cold fury unlike anything I'd ever experienced washed through me, spreading from my core to my fingertips, making them tingle with adrenaline. This wasn't just disrespect anymore. This wasn't just ageist comments or dismissive treatment. This was character assassination. This was Jessica actively working to discredit me, to position me as mentally incompetent rather than a woman standing up for herself, to suggest I was losing my faculties when my mind was sharper than ever, when I still taught adult literacy classes twice weekly and led my book club discussions and balanced my checkbook to the penny. I need to go, I told Carol abruptly. I need to think. After hanging up, I paced my living room, thoughts racing. If Jessica was spreading these rumors widely, how long before they reached my friends, my neighbors, the garden club I'd been president of for 3 years, the literacy program where I volunteered twice weekly? How long before people began looking at me differently, watching for signs of this supposed decline? And what if Michael believed her narrative? What if he really did start thinking about alternative arrangements for his perfectly healthy, mentally sharp mother? That night, I did something I'd never done before. I started documenting everything, every incident with Jessica, over the past 3 years that I could remember. with dates where possible. Every dismissive comment, every canceled visit, every time Michael had failed to stand up for me. I included the text exchanges about the house down payment money, bank records of the transfer, and notes about witnesses to Jessica's "too old for this house" comment at the housewarming. I worked until 2:17 a.m., filling page after page in a fresh notebook with a timeline of disrespect that, once laid out chronologically, was even more damning than I'd realized. The next morning, I called Linda and Margaret separately, asking if they'd be willing to write brief statements about what they'd witnessed at the housewarming party, and any other incidents they could recall. Both agreed immediately, expressing outrage at Jessica's latest tactics. Then I called my doctor and scheduled a full cognitive assessment, explaining the situation frankly. I needed documentation of my mental competence to counter Jessica's narrative before it took root. 3 days later, armed with my doctor's clean bill of health, including a formal letter stating I showed no signs whatsoever of cognitive decline and demonstrated above-average mental acuity for any age, I made an appointment with an attorney. Janet Friedman specialized in elder law, though at 62, I hardly considered myself an elder. Still, her expertise seemed appropriate given Jessica's attacks on my mental competence due to age. "What you're describing is a form of elder abuse called gaslighting," Janet explained after listening to my account of events. Her office was warm and inviting, with none of the intimidating leather and mahogany I'd expected. At 58, she projected a confidence I found myself envying. Her silver-streaked dark hair cut in a stylish bob, her manner both professional and compassionate. It's when someone manipulates you into questioning your own sanity or competence. It's particularly insidious when directed at older adults, because society already has such negative views of aging, especially for women. "I'm not looking to sue my son and daughter-in-law," I clarified, though part of me found the idea momentarily satisfying. "I just want to protect myself from these rumors and recover my down payment contribution." Janet nodded, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "The financial aspect is straightforward enough. Without clear documentation that it was a gift, it's legally considered a loan or investment that can be recalled. As for the defamation, that's trickier. But there are steps we can take to send a clear message that you won't be railroaded." I left her office an hour later with a plan of action and her business card tucked securely in my wallet. Janet would draft a formal demand letter for the return of my $22,000 contribution, with an installment plan option if they claimed financial hardship. She would also include a cease and desist regarding the false statements about my mental health, backed by my medical documentation. The message would be clear. I had evidence, I had legal support, and I wasn't going away quietly. 2 weeks after my meeting with Janet, Michael received the certified letter from her office. He called me immediately, his voice a mixture of shock and anger. "You're suing us. You got a lawyer." "What the hell, Mom? I'm not suing you." I corrected him calmly, though my heart was pounding. "I'm formally requesting the return of my investment in your home and asking Jessica to stop telling people I'm mentally unstable due to my age." A long pause. "What are you talking about?" "Jessica has been telling people at her mother's group that I'm experiencing cognitive decline and might need alternative arrangements soon," I explained, keeping my voice steady despite the hurt that still surged when I thought about it. "It got back to me through Carol's friend Diane. That's she WOULDN. Single quotes," Michael stammered, but I could hear the doubt in his voice. The hesitation that told me this wasn't entirely surprising to him. After a moment, he tried a different approach. "Even if she said something like that, she was probably just venting. You know how tense things have been. Spreading malicious lies about my mental health isn't venting, Michael. It's an attempt to discredit me so no one will believe me when I talk about how I've been treated. And it stops now." The firmness in my voice surprised even me, a steel thread running through words I would have been afraid to speak just weeks ago. Another pause, longer this time. "And the money. You're really demanding that back?" "Yes," I said simply. "As the letter explains, you can pay it in installments if necessary. But I want it returned. This is going to destroy any chance of fixing our relationship." He warned, a note of pleading entering his voice. Is that what you want? The question gave me pause. Was I willing to potentially lose my son over this stand? To risk never seeing my granddaughter grow up? The thought was physically painful, a constriction in my chest that made it hard to breathe. But the answer came with surprising clarity. What I want is a relationship based on mutual respect, not one where I'm expected to accept being humiliated and diminished. If setting that boundary destroys our relationship, then it wasn't much of a relationship to begin with. Michael hung up without another word. I sat with my phone in my hand for several minutes afterward, a complex mixture of emotions washing through me. Grief for what had been lost, fear for what might never be repaired, but underneath it all, a steadily growing sense of pride in my own strength. For perhaps the first time since Jessica had entered our lives, I wasn't making excuses or minimizing the hurt. I wasn't silencing myself to keep the peace. I was standing firm in my own truth, regardless of the consequences. The next day, I received a text from Michael. We'll return the money, $500 a month until it's paid off, but this is between us and Jessica. No lawyers. It was a start, though notably absent was any acknowledgement of Jessica's rumor spreading, or any commitment that it would stop. I replied, the payment plan is acceptable, but the cease and desist regarding false statements about my mental health stands. I have medical documentation of my cognitive soundness and witness statements about Jessica's comments. This isn't negotiable. No response came that day, or the next. I continued with my life volunteering at the literacy program where I helped adults learn to read, working on my mosaic project that was slowly taking shape with pieces of blue and yellow glass, having dinner with Linda and her husband at their home, where we laughed over stories from our college days and carefully avoided the topic of Michael. I was surprised to discover how much energy I'd been devoting to managing my relationship with Michael and Jessica, contorting myself to fit their expectations and soothing my own hurt after their dismissals. Now that I'd stopped doing that, I had more time and emotional space for things that brought me joy. 3 weeks later, I received a check in the mail for $500, the first installment of the repayment. There was no note, no acknowledgement, just the check itself in a plain white envelope with my address typed on a label, rather than handwritten. I deposited it without comment, marking it in a spreadsheet I'd created to track the repayments. One small victory, $21,500 still to go. 2 months passed with regular $500 checks arriving, but no other contact from Michael or Jessica. No updates about Lily, no photos, no calls. The absence ached like a physical wound, a constant dull pain that flared sharp and bright at unexpected moments when I saw a child Lily's age at the grocery store. When I found a children's book I thought she'd love, when I passed the playground where I'd once pushed her on the swings. But I refused to be the one to break the silence. This pattern of them withdrawing access to my granddaughter whenever I failed to comply with their expectations had to end, or we'd never build a healthy relationship. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, I found Michael standing there alone, water dripping from his hair and jacket, looking more disheveled than I'd seen him in years. His hair needed a cut, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mom," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, allowing him into the house he'd grown up in but hadn't visited in months. We sat in the living room, the sound of rain against the windows filling the awkward silence that stretched between us until he finally spoke. "Jessica and I are separating," he said, the words clearly difficult to voice. "I've moved out. I'm staying with Drew for now." Drew had been his best friend since college, a software engineer who lived in a downtown apartment. Shock rendered me momentarily speechless. Of all the scenarios I'd imagined for how this situation might resolve, Michael and Jessica separating hadn't been one of them. "I'm sorry," I said finally, because regardless of my feelings about Jessica, I knew this must be painful for him. "What happened?" Michael ran a hand through his too long hair, drops of water still clinging to the ends. "A lot of things. It's been building for a while, but ... double quotes. He hesitated, then met my eyes directly for the first time since arriving. After everything with you, I started noticing things. The way she talks about other people. The way she talks to me when I don't agree with her. It was like once I saw it with you, I couldn't stop seeing it everywhere. I nodded, careful not to show too much reaction. This wasn't the moment for "I told you so," or for expressing relief that he was finally seeing what had been obvious to everyone else. Instead, I waited for him to continue. "And then I found out she really had been telling people you were losing it mentally," he continued, shame coloring his voice. "Not just Diane. Lots of people, our neighbors, her friends, even my boss's wife at a company dinner. She made it sound like we were dealing with this sad family situation. Like you were slipping away and we were being so supportive while you fought us at every turn." My throat tightened at the confirmation of how widespread Jessica's character assassination had been. Why would she do that? Michael sighed heavily, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at his clasped hands. "Control, I think. When you started standing up to her, it threatened her. Making you seem unstable was her way of making sure no one would believe you if you talked about how she treated you." He looked up at me, his eyes shadowed with guilt. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have stopped it." "Yes," I agreed quietly. "You should have." He flinched slightly at my honesty, but nodded. "I know. I failed you, Mom. For years. Not just with the rumors, but with everything. The way I let her treat you. The way I treated you myself." His voice broke slightly. "I don't know if you can forgive me for that." The question hung in the air between us. Weighted with years of hurt and disappointment, but also decades of love. This was my son, the baby I'd held in my arms for hours during colic, the child I'd raised alone after his father left, the young man I'd supported through college and early adulthood. Could I forgive him? The answer came with surprising ease. "I can forgive you, Michael. But things can't go back to how they were. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be on different terms. With mutual respect." He nodded quickly, relief evident in his expression. "I want that. I really do." He hesitated, then added, "And I want you to be part of Lily's life again. She misses you. She asks about Grandma Elaine all the time." The mention of my granddaughter brought a sharp pang of longing. "I've missed her too. So much." "Jessica and I are working out a custody arrangement," Michael explained, running a hand through his damp hair. "It's been challenging. But I'll have Lily 3 days a week and every other weekend. I'd like you to be able to see her whenever she's with me, if you want to." "I'd like that very much," I said, surprised by the tears that suddenly threatened. "Thank you." We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, beginning the difficult work of honest communication after years of avoidance and enabling. Michael acknowledged how he'd gradually allowed Jessica to isolate me from their lives, how he'd dismissed my feelings to keep peace in his marriage, how he'd failed to stand up for me time and again. I shared how deeply those betrayals had hurt, how invisible and worthless they had made me feel, how the constant age-related jabs had eroded my self-confidence. "I never thought about ageism before," Michael admitted, a new awareness in his expression. "It seemed like I don't know, just jokes or preferences. But when you really look at it, it's everywhere. The assumptions people make, the way older women especially get treated like they're past their expiration date. We become invisible," I agreed. "Unless we're needed for childcare or emotional support. Then suddenly we matter again, temporarily." Michael winced at the accuracy of my assessment. "I'm sorry I contributed to that. You deserved better from me." As he prepared to leave, Michael hesitated at the door, rain still falling steadily outside. "Mom, about the money, I'll keep sending the payments. But I want you to know I'm looking for a better job. Something that pays more. I want to pay you back faster." "I appreciate that," I said. "But Michael, this was never really about the money. It was about being valued and respected." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. And I'm going to work every day to earn back your trust. I promise." After he left, I sat in my quiet house, processing the unexpected turn of events. My stand for respect had cost me months with my granddaughter and nearly broken my relationship with my son. But it had also, apparently, opened Michael's eyes to patterns he'd been blind to before. Was that worth the pain? I wasn't sure yet, but I knew I wouldn't have done anything differently. Some prices are worth paying, even when they hurt. In the months that followed, Michael and I began the careful work of rebuilding our relationship. He kept his word about Lily, bringing her to visit regularly during his parenting time. At first, our interactions were slightly awkward, both of us navigating new boundaries and expectations. But gradually, a healthier pattern emerged. He began calling just to check in, not only when he needed something. He asked about my life, my interests, my friends. He listened when I spoke instead of dismissing my opinions as outdated or irrelevant. Small changes, but significant ones. The financial payments continued as agreed, but they became less central to our interactions as trust slowly rebuilt. 6 months after our reconciliation, Michael was offered a position at a competing firm with a significantly higher salary. He used his signing bonus to pay off the remaining balance of what he owed me in one lump sum, hand-delivering the check with a heartfelt note of apology. "I want to be clear that this doesn't erase what happened," he said when he handed me the envelope. "This is just making good on a financial obligation. The emotional debt is something I'll be working to repay for much longer." His self-awareness moved me deeply. The son who had once stood silent while his wife declared me too old for their house was growing into a man who understood accountability and respect. As for Jessica, our paths rarely crossed now. When they did, during handoffs of Lily or school events, she maintained a cold, formal distance. The rumors about my mental decline had stopped. Janet's cease and desist letter had been effective, but the damage to my reputation had required active repair. I'd had several uncomfortable but necessary conversations with neighbors and acquaintances, providing the doctor's letter when needed and simply living my life with evident competence and clarity. Some relationships were beyond repair. The mothers from Jessica's group continued to regard me with wary suspicion, but others were strengthened by my willingness to stand up for myself and speak the truth. 1 year after the housewarming party incident, I celebrated my 63rd birthday with a gathering at my home. Michael and Lily were there, along with Thomas and Carol, Linda and her husband, Margaret, and several other friends. As I looked around at the faces of people who truly valued me, who saw me as a whole person rather than just an age category, I felt a sense of peace and rightness that had been missing for too long. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Michael found me in the kitchen where I was packaging leftover cake into containers for guests to take home. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, giving me a warm hug. "I've been thinking a lot about last year, how different things were." "So have I admitted, closing the cake container and wiping a crumb from the counter. "It's been quite a journey. I'm proud of you," he said unexpectedly, leaning against the counter beside me. "For standing up for yourself, for not letting me or Jessica or anyone else treat you as less than you are. You taught me something important." His words brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "What's that?" "That respect isn't something you age out of," he replied simply. "It's a fundamental right, at every stage of life." As I went to bed that night, I reflected on the truth of his words. At 63, I was not too old for respect, for dignity, for standing my ground. I was not too old for setting boundaries or demanding better treatment. I was not too old for new beginnings or second chances. I was not too old for anything that mattered. Jessica had been wrong that day at the housewarming. I wasn't too old for their house or any house, but I had outgrown the need to make myself smaller to accommodate others' comfort. I had outgrown the fear of speaking truth to power. I had outgrown the belief that my worth diminished with each passing year. And in that outgrowing, I had found a stronger, more authentic version of myself, one who knew her value wasn't determined by youth or appearance or others' approval, one who understood that the wisdom and self-knowledge that come with age are not liabilities but assets, precious resources to be respected and honored. That night, as rain pattered gently against my bedroom window, I fell asleep with a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. Too old? No, just finally, fully aware of my own worth. And that awareness, hard won though it was, had been worth every painful step of the journey.